When he pulled the towering Apache woman from those treacherous waters, Boone Carter never imagined what would follow. The very next evening, her father arrived bearing a life-altering proposition that would shake everything. He thought he knew about his future. The rapids ran deeper and more violent than they appeared from the bank. When Boone Carter first noticed something amiss, the fierce current had already seized what looked like an enormous figure battling the rushing torrent. Another man might have continued his journey without pause, but Boone had witnessed something in those frantic movements, the precise, warrior-like strikes of someone trained for combat. Even while drowning threatened to claim them, she towered at nearly 6 feet when he managed to pull her onto solid ground. River water cascaded from buckskins that appeared custom-made for someone of extraordinary stature and power. Her gaze held an intensity that made him instinctively retreat. This was no ordinary woman, the elaborate beadwork adorning her garments, the commanding way she held herself despite choking up river water, everything indicated high status, yet she remained silent, speaking no words he could understand. When their eyes met, her expression seemed less grateful than appraising, as if she were studying him for some purpose he couldn't fathom. Before sunrise, she had vanished into the wild country, leaving behind only damp tracks and a solitary eagle feather placed beside his sleeping area. Boone figured their paths would never cross again. That assumption crumbled within 18 hours. The thunder of multiple horses reached his camp as darkness fell the following day. Boone tallied no fewer than 12 mounted figures approaching. They moved with military precision, yet their arrangement held ceremonial significance. Leading them rode a figure whose very presence seemed to bend the surrounding atmosphere to his will. Age had marked him. Battle scars told their tales across his weathered face, and his ceremonial dress spoke of undisputed authority. The leader's eyes locked onto Boone immediately. His English flowed perfectly, measured and heavy with authority that made the wilderness silence feel oppressive. "You brought my daughter back from those waters." It wasn't posed as a question. Somehow, this man possessed complete knowledge of the events. But his emphasis on the word daughter made Boone's heart race. Not just any daughter, clearly. The way his warriors observed suggested this wasn't just any chief either. "I've come to discuss compensation." That word hung suspended in the air like smoke signals. Yet something in the chief's inflection hinted this conversation would encompass far more than simple gratitude, something that would transform everything Boone believed about his isolated frontier existence. What Boone couldn't know was that his spontaneous act of bravery had triggered a sequence of events that would test everything he understood about honor, fate, and the true meaning of saving another's life. Dawn's early light stretched shadows across the rugged landscape when Boone Carter first detected the sound that would alter his destiny forever. It wasn't his horse's familiar leather creaks or snorts breaking the wilderness quiet. Something entirely different caught his attention, a rhythmic splashing that seemed out of place in these remote parts. He'd been tracking alongside the river for 3 days, staying on elevated ground where his view commanded miles in every direction. Below, the water rushed fast and swollen from recent mountain storms that had transformed peaceful streams into raging torrents. Most travelers completely avoided this route, choosing longer but safer passages through valley floors. The splashing intensified as he neared the water's edge. Through morning fog, he spotted a figure struggling in the current, someone fighting the flow with powerful, purposeful strokes. Something was terribly wrong. The person was losing the battle, being dragged downstream toward razor-sharp rocks protruding from the riverbed like savage fangs. Boone leaped from his saddle, boots finding grip on the treacherous bank. The figure proved larger than anticipated, moving with controlled panic of someone skilled in swimming but overwhelmed by nature's raw force. The relentless current swept the struggling form toward those deadly rocks with each heartbeat. Without pause, he dove into the freezing torrent. The shock hit him like a sledgehammer, but he pressed forward through the churning rapids. The person ahead was a woman unlike any he'd encountered in his frontier years. Tall and powerfully constructed, with flowing black hair streaming like a battle flag in the current. Her buckskin garments displayed elaborate beadwork that sparkled even while submerged. The artistry was remarkable, indicating this was no common traveler. Though there was no time to ponder her identity, those deadly rocks drew closer as her strength clearly waned. Boone reached her just as she disappeared beneath the surface for the third time. His arm encircled her waist, and her solid weight and underlying muscle surprised him. She didn't panic at his touch or fight him as many drowning victims do. Instead, she seemed to evaluate him even while gasping for air, her dark eyes meeting his with fierce, calculating intelligence. Together they battled toward shore, the woman contributing her remaining strength to their escape from the river's deadly grip. When they finally collapsed on the rocky bank, both fighting for breath, Boone found himself facing someone who commanded respect. Even while drenched and vulnerable, she examined him with those piercing eyes, and momentarily he felt like the one being rescued rather than the rescuer. But as she rose to her full, impressive height, wringing water from her long hair, Boone understood that saving her life might have been the simple part. The challenge would be understanding why someone of her obvious importance had been alone in such perilous waters to begin with. The woman's silence proved more disturbing than any words might have been. She stood on the riverbank, water still streaming from her buckskin dress, regarding Boone with an expression that seemed to weigh every aspect of his character. When she finally spoke, it was in an unfamiliar tongue, though her tone suggested neither gratitude nor hostility, something more complex that escaped his. Understanding, Boone raised his hands peacefully, gesturing to himself. "Boone," he said simply. "Boone Carter." She tilted her head thoughtfully, processing this information. Then she placed her hand on her chest and spoke a single word that flowed like water itself. "Ayana." The formal introduction felt strange considering he'd just pulled her from a raging torrent. But Boone sensed that with this woman every gesture carried significance. She moved with controlled grace of someone accustomed to leadership. Despite her recent ordeal, nothing about her posture suggested defeat. Ayana approached his patient horse, studying the animal with the same intense scrutiny she'd given Boone. Her hand stroked the horse's flank, and the animal responded with obvious approval. Even his typically wary mount seemed to recognize something authoritative in her presence. Turning back to Boone, she gestured downstream, then shook her head with unmistakable firmness. Her message was clear. Whatever had brought her to that dangerous stretch of river, she had no intention of continuing in that direction. Boone pointed toward his distant camp, then to the darkening sky indicating approaching evening. Ayana followed his gaze and nodded once, a decisive movement suggesting calculated decision-making rather than simple acceptance of help. At his camp, she moved with wilderness efficiency. She gathered firewood without prompting, her movements precise and economical, but she kept glancing toward distant hills as if expecting someone or something to appear. As sunset approached, casting long shadows across their temporary shelter, Boone offered her dried meat from his provisions. She accepted with a nod that might have indicated gratitude, though her expression remained guarded. They ate in comfortable silence, crackling flames their only sound. When full darkness arrived, Ayana grew restless. She stood frequently, scanning horizons with the alertness of someone trained to read danger in the landscape. Her hand occasionally moved to her side, where Boone noticed the outline of a knife handle beneath her buckskin dress. Finally, she approached and spoke urgently in her native language. She pointed to herself, then to the darkness beyond their fire, shaking her head emphatically. Then she pointed to him with a gesture clearly meaning stay or wait. Before Boone could respond, she had gathered her still damp belongings and stepped into shadows beyond the firelight. He heard her movements briefly, then only normal wilderness night sounds. Morning brought her absence. The only evidence of her presence was footprints leading from camp, and a single eagle feather placed deliberately beside his bedroll. A feather that seemed too perfect and precisely positioned to be coincidental. As Boone examined the feather in morning light, he couldn't escape the feeling that his encounter with Ayana had been something more than a simple rescue. But what that something might be remained as mysterious as the woman herself. Boone spent the morning studying Ayana's tracks, trying to decipher their story. The trail headed north into rocky terrain that would challenge even experienced trackers, but they appeared deliberate and purposeful. This wasn't someone fleeing in panic. This was someone who knew exactly her destination. He tucked the eagle feather into his saddlebag and continued his westward journey, constantly glancing toward the northern hills where her trail had vanished. The encounter left him with more questions than answers, and questions had a way of gnawing at a man during long saddle hours. By midday, merciless sun beat down, and Boone decided to rest in cottonwood shade near the river. He was checking his horse's shoes when he heard them, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching from the east. The riders appeared, as dark silhouettes against the bright horizon, moving with military precision. As they drew closer, Boone counted 12 mounted figures, all wearing practical clothing of people who lived their entire lives outdoors. But something ceremonial about their formation suggested this wasn't a casual patrol or hunting party. Their leader commanded attention even from distance. He sat his horse with natural authority that couldn't be learned or faked. As the group approached Boone's resting spot, that authority became even more apparent. He was older than the other riders, perhaps 50 winters, with silver threading through predominantly black hair. Scars marked his face and hands, not random wounds, but deliberate marks of someone who had survived many battles. His clothing was both practical and ceremonial, decorated with symbols speaking of leadership and respect earned through deeds rather than birth. When the group stopped 20 feet from Boone's position, the leader dismounted with fluid grace. His dark eyes took in every detail of Boone's camp, his horse, his weapons, and finally Boone himself. The scrutiny felt thorough and professional, like being evaluated by someone who could read a man's character through how he cared for his equipment. "You brought my daughter back from those waters," the man said in English that was not only fluent but carried the cadence of someone who had mastered it as a diplomatic tool. The statement hit Boone like a physical blow, not because it was threatening, but because it revealed how much this man already knew. He hadn't asked if Boone had seen a woman or been near the river. He knew exactly what had happened, probably down to the smallest detail. "Your daughter?" Boone managed. Though the words felt inadequate, the man stepped closer, and Boone could see his eyes held the same intelligent intensity he'd noticed in Ayanna. "Her name is Ayanna, she told me about." The man who risked his life for a stranger. A dozen questions formed in Boone's mind, but the leader continued before he could voice any of them. "I am Nastas," he said, and the way he spoke his own name suggested it carried weight in these parts. "Chief of our people. And you, Boone Carter, have done something that requires acknowledgement." The word acknowledgement hung in the air with implications. Boone couldn't yet understand. But something in Nasta's tone suggested this conversation was about to become far more significant than simple parental gratitude. Nasta's gestured for Boone to sit, transforming what could have been an intimidating confrontation into something more like a formal meeting. The other warriors remained mounted but relaxed their postures slightly, though Boone noticed they maintained positions allowing quick response if needed. "My daughter was not in that river by accident," Nastas began, settling cross-legged on the ground with ease of someone who had conducted important business in similar circumstances countless times. "She was there because of duty, because of honor, because sometimes the most dangerous path is the only path that leads where we need to go." Boone found himself leaning forward despite his caution. Every word Nastas spoke seemed to carry layers of meaning, and he sensed that understanding those layers might be crucial to understanding why 12 armed warriors had tracked him down 3 days ago. "Our scouts brought word of strangers moving through our territory," Nastas continued. "Men who showed no respect for the land, who took what they pleased and left destruction in their wake. My daughter volunteered to cross the river and learn their true intentions." The pieces began falling into place in Boone's mind. Ayanna hadn't been crossing the river for pleasure or convenience. She had been on a reconnaissance mission that had nearly cost her life. The current was stronger than expected, Nastas said, and for the first time Boone heard something that might have been vulnerability in his voice. "She is strong, skilled, but the river shows mercy to no one." Boone nodded, remembering how even Ayanna's obvious strength had been no match for the churning water. "She fought it well, but another few minutes, ... Yes, Nastas said simply. "Another few minutes and my people would have lost not just a daughter, but our next leader." The weight of that revelation settled over Boone like a heavy blanket. He hadn't just pulled a woman from the river, he had saved the future chief of what was obviously a significant tribe. This creates what my people call a debt of balance, Nastas explained. When someone saves the life of a leader, especially when that person risks their own life in the process, the debt cannot be repaid with simple gratitude. One of the mounted warriors said something in their language, and Nastas nodded before turning back to Boone. My men remind me that you could have continued your journey. Many would have. The river was dangerous, the outcome uncertain, but you chose risk over safety, duty to a stranger over duty to yourself. Boone shifted uncomfortably. Any decent person would have done the same. No, Nastas said firmly. Many people speak of what they would do. Few actually do it when the moment comes, and fewer still do it for someone who is clearly not of their own people. The chief stood and walked to his horse, retrieving something from his saddlebags. When he returned, he held a bundle wrapped in soft leather. This is why I have come, he said, his voice taking on a formal tone that made even his warriors straighten in their saddles. To discuss your reward, Boone's pulse quickened. The way Nastas spoke the word reward suggested this wasn't going to be a simple gift of supplies or safe passage through their territory. But first, Nastas continued, you must understand that what I'm about to offer will change your life completely. Once offered, it cannot be taken back. Once accepted, it cannot be undone. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of horses, shifting and the distant murmur of the river where everything had started. Continue watching for more incredible frontier tales where courage meets destiny in the most unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider supporting us with a super chat to help us bring you these authentic stories. Your support means the world to us.